Good afternoon. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Columbia Business School. Adam Roseman is here with us today. He is the co-founder and CEO of Steady, an incredible app that is working nationwide and essentially lifting individuals out of poverty during these trying times. Adam is a professional colleague and a new friend of mine. Met him last year regarding a financial technology event, and we instantly hit it off. And what struck me about Adam was his earnesty and his genuine sense of wanting to give back and help people, and at the same time leverage technology. So I'm thrilled to have him here today speaking to the community at Columbia Business School. He and Sandra are teed up for what was going to be an interesting conversation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sandra.
Thanks, Dawn. Really appreciate you helping us pull everything together, and thank you to everyone involved in pulling all of our event attendees and Adam together. So Adam, welcome to Columbia Business School, virtually online. We're thrilled to have this conversation with you. I think to, just tee up the conversation, we're hoping to cover topics around, during this time of pandemic, racial and income inequality gaps and disparities in the United States, but also the role that financial inclusion and fintech and social entrepreneurs like you have in filling that gap. And there's a lot of other topics that we're hoping to get to today around data analytics and diversity, equity, inclusion. So we have a lot of ground to cover. And just for the audience, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of this Zoom. So please feel free to put your Q&A in, and we will be taking some audience questions. And we'd also love to talk about Shaquille O'Neal at some point too. So Adam, I always love starting with a little bit about your background. I mean, we know a little bit about your origin story and your parents as their struggles with income and retirement and things like that helped form the thoughts around why do Steady as your entrepreneurial ventures. But I wanted to start a little bit earlier than that and ask you to maybe share with us a little bit about where you grew up.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me today. And thank you so much, Dawn, for pulling this together. You've been an amazing supporter, and thank you for all you do. So great to see everyone. Thanks for taking the time with me. I grew up, was born in Reno, lived there till I was 7, Reno, Nevada, and moved to Sacramento, California with my mom after my parents separated. Lived there until school, and then went off to a little surfer town called Santa Cruz, to a school called UC Santa Cruz, just south of San Francisco, to play basketball.
And if you think about your time at UC Santa Cruz, if you had a friend from college, how would they have described you?
Nuts. So, I went to school, I think not quite at college level maturity. Let's just put it that way. About halfway through freshman year, I don't know what happened, but something just changed. And the end of my freshman year, ended up getting elected president of my fraternity for my sophomore year, which had never happened, to anything but a senior. And then that just kind of lit a fire under me, and started working aggressively full-time in investment banking starting my junior year. So I think first half of a freshman year, your typical immature freshman, they're forward. I think, not much sleep, let's just put it that way, head down.
And so you started out in investment banking, but you're also a serial entrepreneur and worked in overseas as well. Can you talk a little bit about the paths that you considered and what you ended up exploring?
Yeah, it's been a non-traditional route. So yeah, I started in M&A and corporate finance in the Bay Area, right at the peak of the first internet boom. And ended up staying in M&A until about 2006. Met a gentleman in New York by the name of Michael Loeb, who runs an entity that finances a number of small businesses. He had just sold his company Synapse Group to Time Warner, And I met Michael at the Clinton Global Initiative, where I had set up a young global leaders group, bringing together entrepreneurs from California who had had early exits and connecting them with global philanthropy through CGI in New York, the Sheraton Midtown, as where it took place each year. Met Michael. He kind of took me under his wing and set me on an airplane to China and said, "Hey, I'm gonna underwrite this endeavor for you. You've got a lot of drive, initiative. You want to do good, right?" And that my goal was at that point in time focused on sustainability related activities, so investment banking and merchant banking and making small investments into clean energy businesses. And he had some contacts in China, and off I went, young and naive at 28, 29 years old, to a plane to China in 2007. And
Did you learn Mandarin?
I never studied it. Well, let's just put it this way. I am conversational, although I also spoke Spanish in school, and now I'm living in Florida as of recently. So now my Chinese and Spanish just merge, and I'm trying to keep the two separate, but it's difficult. So. Yeah.
So, I mean, in some ways you had the opportunity to have that social entrepreneurship interest, and you sort of nurtured a little bit.
Yeah.
But then you started other ventures prior to Steady. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you learned from that?
Yeah, so the first one in China was a merchant bank that we partnered with actually 8 local government entities in mainland China to establish small fund businesses to invest in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. So this was very local businesses, and 2008 through 2010. That were individuals that had, in many instances, spent very little time outside of their local communities. I won't say small, because a lot of these were cities of 5 to 10 million people, but cities that no one had ever heard of outside of East Asia at the time. And it was a journey, right? And our focus was on deploying capital in businesses that were focused again on sustainability predominantly. And we were working with entrepreneurs to try to build solid infrastructure and help them to scale. What I found at that point in time is that China was a little bit of the wild, wild west. If any of you have heard of the book Mr. China, I lived that 5 times over, and it was a challenge. So ended up spending far too much of my time learning the Chinese legal ins and outs, and having to figure out how do we recoup our investment funds in situations where it was a bit challenging to do so. But it was an experience, to say the least. I think coming back to the U.S. from that, everything feels easy, as I like to say. Ups and downs in startups are nothing compared to trying to run one there. After that, I invested in and co-founded a small media business in China that was licensing US content. So things like all the major award shows, the Grammys, Billboard Music Awards, bunch of others. And we'd produce our own red carpet content in Chinese language with Chinese celebrities on the carpet at the US event, package that with the main show, broadcast and license that into China, predominantly to their digital platforms. This is like 2012, 13, 14. And then we also produced like the equivalent of Access Hollywood for China. And in addition to that, worked with about 200 US celebrities in film, TV, and sports to help them with their social and endorsement presences in China. And in fact, that's when I built the relationship with Shatil.
I see. So you sort of in some ways go back a longer way than just the creation of Steady. So, I mean, fast forwarding to the point at which you decided, okay, this idea around creating Steady and focusing around low and middle income customers and increasing their income, like what was the trigger where you kind of felt like you had enough information that now is the time to let's do this? Did you ever get to a point, and what was the thing that was like, okay, this is the thing I want to dedicate the next number of years to?
Yeah, so it happened pretty quickly. The origin story, my mom worked multiple jobs in Sacramento, didn't grow up with my father, but my father moved he was retirement age, late 60s, moved to Savannah, Georgia from Sacramento, California, and had no retirement savings whatsoever, and was trying to find work to pay the bills. He moved to Savannah, a nice retirement town, very low cost living, and he could not find a job that would provide for a livable wage, where he would get enough hours at a high enough rate to be able to pay the bills. He had worked in restaurants over the course of his life in Sacramento at the NBA arena, running concessions, but couldn't find a job in Savannah to pay the bills. And so, so I went down to Savannah and helped him cobble together what I like to think of today as an income portfolio, right? Mm-hmm. So he had to work 2, 3, 4 different types of work in order to, effectively come to what would otherwise be provided generally through a single job, right? Single W-2 job. And, at that point in time, just looked at those two experiences as a child and as an adult with both of my parents, and, just became really stimulated and fascinated at that time. So, I think the impetus then was to connect with the McKinsey Global Institute folks in San Francisco, who have, at the time, I believe, the Bible, A Future of Work research, just tremendous. And dug in with them, one of the authors of the report, and became very clear very quickly that my dad was not unique, and that this was a challenge that was now shared by at least a third, by some measures approaching now, after the effects of the last year, half of the U.S. workforce, right, in terms of having to have more than a single source of income in order to pay the bills. So at that point in time, the light bulb just went on, and I saw that there was no solution focused on really driving a positive outcome for those workers. There was, unions of old didn't exist at scale, and that there needed to be sort of a 21st version century of a union or an association created, whereby workers could band together with a tremendous amount of data for purposes of utilizing that data for nothing but lifting the potential of that entire community, right? Just given that employers, contracting entities, everyone else has so much tremendous access to data now at the employer level, which virtually none of that benefits the workers. So they needed the ability to fight back through tech.
Yeah, and in some ways, it's such a unique voice that we hear in the data analytics space, especially through the business school. We often hear of bigger companies being able to mine data and to use it to understand customers better. But it's actually quite rare to hear of a venture where it's about using that data to empower your customers around the decisions that they make, as opposed to like presenting push information. So can you talk, can you give us the elevator pitch firstly for those on the call who are maybe not so familiar with what Steady does? The quick summary.
So Steady's main focus is on lifting the incomes of low to moderate income workers, but these are predominantly hourly gig 1099 and contract workers who, in many instances, either currently have multiple forms of income, or they have a job today that's just not paying the bills, and they need to find a second, third, fourth source of income, or replace their existing form of income with something that's going to provide for more stability. And so, the way that we approach that is by filling a data void in the market, right? If you think about, worker data, think about wage data, the Department of Labor, the Bureau of Labor Services, BLS, have tremendous data around W-2 work. They know how much people make in different work types. They're full-time jobs, so they don't have to worry about hourly utilization. Once you get beyond full-time W-2 work, that database shrinks very dramatically, right, in terms of its overall data set and quite frankly, its accuracy. And so, they have data for hourly workers on how much they get paid per hour, different work types in different regions, but no data on hours worked, right? Volatility of earnings, financial health of those individuals based on that volatility and nature of work, things like, payday loan usage, whether it be traditional or digital earned wage access now, which I view in some instances as a payday loan-like situation that someone is in. And a whole host of other factors. And then if you think about 1099 work, right, no data around how much people are earning, the consistency of those earnings, utilization rates, right, which are from the standpoint of 1099 work is at least as important as actual hourly wage, right, or hourly pay is the utilized time versus the available time. So none of that data exists, right? So from our perspective, we accumulate that data from our member base. through a variety of different forms, including bank account linkage through Plaid, for some of you who may be familiar with Plaid, but whereby our IP is focused on cleaning the deposits, right, which really nobody else does. So identifying, is it deposit income or is it a cash transfer, right, or is it a refund? And if it's income, what's the source of that income based on that transaction stream? So our data teams gone through a manual process, but also now built a series of data models, machine learning models, validation models that enable us to be able to clean those transactions and identify the employer, right? From there, we acquire a lot of data from the worker themselves. So things like work type, right, at that employer. Once we know the employer, we can map it to industry. We can map that industry to the Department of Labor's BLS and be able to pull down through the ONET database, things like what work types exist in that industry. So then we can just simply prompt to the individual, what work type are you in, right, in this industry, because we've identified your industry. Once they tell us their work type, then we can map the skills that are associated with that work type, right? That's available data that we're able to pull. At that point in time, we can create, a collaborative filtering based lookalike presentation to our member base that enables them to see, okay, how much do you make today? How much do other individuals in your area from that work in the same industry as you make? But then also now rolling out, what are other work types with similar skills that you have that pay higher than what you pay today, right? So that we can give people guidance along that path. So a variety of different data sets, a lot more that we'll inject over time, things like payroll data, time and attendance data, but we're marching down the path. So the core use of that today has been on lifting people's incomes through giving them transparency around earnings potential that they don't have today, right? True earnings that people are generating from the community. But we're now finding, and I'll pause and let you decide if you want me to go down this path later, but we're now using that data for a variety of different paths that are more NGO and public sector oriented, things like emergency cash grant programs, universal basic income initiatives, in addition to trying to now fix the big unemployment insurance challenge that's happened through the formation of what's called PUA, which is a 1099 unemployment insurance mechanism that came out as part of the CARES Act.
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask you about developments during the pandemic. I noticed you'd also expanded into telemedicine. How do you filter there are so many sort of products and services that could help low-income workers. How do you filter which ones you'll pursue? Is it more opportunistic as to what partners come around, or is it some other prioritization framework you use?
It's all based on need from the member, and it's based on resource allocation, resource requirements. So if you think about telemedicine, that's not our product, right? There was an API available. We had 2 million or 1.5 million frontline workers at the onset of COVID. We have nearly 3 now. And we knew that they were going to be challenged with access to healthcare, especially during a time like we've had over the last year, when they were still expected to go to work, right? And when they were substantially at risk. And so for us, it was just simply partnering with a company that had an API so that we could provide that access to our worker population, kind of as a, we're here for you, right? Endeavor. We were able to do that very cost effectively. And I think it went a long way, right? We had well over 20,000 of our members who actually put that to use substantially. So that was a really easy endeavor. It was like less than a sprint, right, for one of our pods to get that.
How many users do you have currently?
Nearly 3 million now.
3 million, yeah.
Yeah.
I thought so. And can you talk a little bit about not just the racial equity breakdown, right? I think I've seen statistics that you may be 50% Black and Brown communities, but also the gender side. We've heard a lot about the pandemic, in particular impacting women in the workforce because of schools being closed and the like.
Yeah. I mean, I'm one of those. My wife had to leave her job, and it's far too common. But our member base is, even pre-pandemic, about 60% female. It's about 40% Black and Brown today. But in terms of what we saw relative to the pandemic, those that sustained substantial income loss who then qualified for our cash grant program, substantially overweighted, right, to the tune of 1.5 to 2 times overweighted, Black and Brown communities who faced the greatest impact, unfortunately, from the pandemic, financial impact.
Yeah, maybe this is the point in which it would be appropriate to bring in your connection to Shaquille O'Neal, because in some ways, the information that you're collecting from a free app, right, requires a lot of trust with the communities that you're targeting. And, people from the sports field are sort of a trust proxy for communities that maybe have also had bad experiences with financial services, right? Like everyone knows about the history of redlining in this country. So can you talk a little bit about the sort of marketing awareness, PR sort of strategies that you think through in expanding your user base?
Yeah, so that was the thought process with Shaquille early on. And fortunately, he wanted to be a part of our business, asked to be a part of our business. He is an equity holder. We've never paid him a dollar. He invested in the company, and he views this as, yes, a money-making opportunity, but I think very, very different than a lot of the endorsement deals he has, whether it be with a General or Papa John's or others, right? And that he's not selling a product, right? He's selling financial health, and that's important to him, and it comes from the heart. And so I think from our perspective, what we look to do is how do we swing above our weight, right, early on, from the standpoint of generating trust, brand awareness, visibility, checking that box. And he certainly has helped us to do that. I think the thing that we had to do was figure out the right way to deploy him. And the right way was not him standing up there, with an app, promoting an app. But what's been most effective is the content that we've created, and we have a lot of this coming. We're actually filming April 7th, our largest set of content ever with him by far. But the focus has been really, what's been most effective is him sitting down with our members, those who are having challenges, demonstrating empathy, which he certainly has, talking to them about their challenges, really understanding our product, right, so that he can give them feedback, which has been tremendous. In addition to that, I would say the other really helpful factor is we've worked now for 2 years with Common Sense Labs, Dan Ariely at Duke University, who's considered to be, probably the top behavioral economist in financial services, and BlackRock and the MetLife Foundation fund a program at Common Sense Labs where they're able to provide support to 3 businesses a year, right, through their entity where we don't have to pay. We're the first company ever that's been brought into that program 2 consecutive years. So working with him and his team, that's been tremendously helpful in terms of us augmenting, running a tremendous number of research projects and tests around how do we build trust within the ecosystem, within our communication stream with our members, such that they feel comfortable with giving us their information. Just to give you some data points, about pre-working with Common Sense Labs, so let's just say 18 months ago, we were just slightly less than 10% of our members would link their bank account in the first month. We're now close to 70%.
Okay, terrific. And do you use psychological profiling techniques around targeting customers? Customers don't all think the same, and there's some interesting research that we've seen through Columbia Business School around psychological processes and financial decision making.
So I think the path that you're going down, probably not, right? In terms of what we have today is that we have, general onboarding language that's been built around a substantial amount of research at this point and running countless tests, different points within the app that are encouraging data collection, obviously for purposes of creating a better outcome for them. But we have different language at different of those points of the app that create context, right, as to the reason why that data is being provided. And then depending on their actions within the app, we do take them down different re-engagement funnels, right? Build them into different canvases within Braze, our re-engagement system, such that we're hitting them with different messaging depending on the actions that they've taken within the app to date.
Got it. I think I've heard you speak about your revenue model and that you're using it sort of an income share and the income boosters when you're referring customers to appropriate financial products that hopefully reduce their fees. For example, late fees are a huge revenue generator for a lot of financial firms. Do you use your customer data in any other way to generate revenue?
We don't. So that boosters marketplace, right? So first off, our jobs section of our app, which is the most utilized section, is not, we don't receive funds for that, right? It's we want our models that are progressing and getting better and better over time, beta iteration in Q2 of this year coming, to be unbiased, right? We don't want those data models to ever become biased by, we're getting paid by this company and not this one. And in particular, we want to be able to have every available job that's relevant for this workforce in our app, right? And so that was a fundamental decision that we made early on, and we've stuck to it. So yes, that financial services and benefits marketplace, where we've hand-selected partners that we know will improve the financial health of our members, where we can generate a fee and share it back with our member, creating a mutual incentive, is mutually aligned incentive was our first inroad, and we've done quite well with that from a unit economics perspective. We've now moved on to, we do have a subscription product, which is low dollar, $199 a month, that will soon carry an income guarantee. We are able to measure now that we lift our average members' earnings by $5,500 per year, on a pre-steady average income basis of about $45,000. So it's quite material, right? 11 to 12%. So we thought that $1.99 was reasonable. So long as we provide an income guarantee, just given that, again, that will enable us to not bias our models by charging the employer. And these members are used to paying things like association dues. So we view it as or union dues. We view it as very similar and affordable. But we're going down a path now where we're getting others to pay for it for them, right? So financial services entities, I can't name the names, but a couple of very large financial services businesses that are very focused on brand, have the highest NPS scores, are now going to be deploying and purchasing our Steady Plus product, our subscription product, for a large cohort of their member base, right? Or their constituent base. Yeah. Same with workforce boards, right? At the state level. So the goal is to offload that. And then the last piece is for the data, right? So now working with state unemployment insurance offices, we're not directly monetizing the data, but the data that we have that's enabled us to be able to train our data models, right? Those models now exist based on that data set, and we're able to monetize those models, right? Without utilizing the PII or actual data of our members.
Okay, terrific. Given how in some ways, how clean your revenue generation model is, have you had success in raising funds to fund the venture through impact investors, or has it been more traditional venture type minded investors?
It's a combination, but people who meet me the first time, I think, know what they're getting, right? And so, if they're looking for a monetization first business that's going to push monetization, tomorrow at all costs, that's not us, right? And we're very clear. So our largest investor to date is Flourish, which is the Omidyar network, right? Which is a large social impact investor. Actually doing TechCrunch with their partner who's on our board tomorrow. And they're phenomenal. We have some strategic investors, Recruit Holdings, which owns Indeed and Glassdoor. It's a large Japanese conglomerate, but the largest jobs board / HR services business in the world. They led our Series B just based on the unique data set that we have. But they were very clear on the fact that, listen, we're building this unique data platform, right? We're servicing workers, but they also knew that, that impact and monetization were going to have to go hand in hand.
Yeah, terrific. Glassdoor brings up a related question, and I asked this, I think I shared with you before we started the webinar. We do a lot of work around mass incarceration, and mass incarceration not only has, horrible, traumatic, intergenerational impacts on Black and Brown communities, but also has long-term, not just income inequality effects, but intergenerational wealth effects, right, in this country. And Glassdoor comes to mind just because they've had an interesting initiative around fair chance hiring, right, encouraging employers to brand themselves as fair chance hirers, like ban the box, and doing conditional offers and postponing background checks, for example. Have you thought about, the financial income generation opportunities, for example, and this broader topic of, fair chance hiring opportunities, and highlighting that and building that into the Steady app?
Yes, we've thought about it. I think it is an area that, as I mentioned to, I'm pretty well versed in. Just given that, as I mentioned, my sister is a pretty prominent criminal defense attorney in Atlanta, works for the Innocence Project, and her partner, who's the chairman and president of the National Criminal Defense Attorneys Association. I forgot the acronym, but this is their major initiative is reentry, and so this is an area that I am passionate about. We have had some dialogue with some tremendous organizations in LA. I think it's called 70 Million Jobs, right?
Yep.
Homeboy Bakery, right, in Los Angeles, and from our perspective, I think it's something that we will aggressively probably get to later this year in terms of thinking about how do we evolve that into the app, right? And I think in general, that will include a variety of different items that are appropriate and relevant for people to know aside from that, right? So specifically, does this job provide for healthcare, right? And that you have employers like Starbucks and Costco who provide healthcare for all of their workers who work more than 20 hours a week, right? And that's relevant for someone beyond just earnings, because that should factor into that. I think this is another one of those areas where it's going to be very important to highlight. And we certainly see exactly what you're talking about. If you want to lift someone's earnings, but they're being held back by the fact that that there's just not opportunities for them to pursue, even if they are well qualified, that's a problem, right? And I actually was not aware of that Glassdoor initiative until you just brought it up, so I'm going to look into that. I wonder, do you have any sense of their success with that? Because I think in general, Glassdoor seems to be more of a higher end white collar platform, right? Do you have any sense for their success metrics?
Yeah, I think they reached out to their user base, and about 200 employers have committed to fair chance hiring. And so you can actually search on their platform for opportunities. And so for formerly incarcerated people, it's a terrific source of information, at least to find employers that don't discriminate. I mean, in the end, we're talking about discrimination. Just a quick plug for us, because under what we call our Reentry Acceleration Program, not only do we train MBA students to teach business courses, i.e. financial literacy, entrepreneurship, and negotiation skills to formerly incarcerated and incarcerated people pre-pandemic who were teaching in the prisons, but we have a lot of students interested in this area of mass incarceration, finance teaching, employment, and increasing employment opportunities. So please think of us. We would love to be helpful if we can for some of your thoughts around this space, because we see it as a huge gap. And also to mention, the Financial Solutions Lab is starting to think about launching an initiative around this particular topic for formerly incarcerated people, given that some of the statistics are horrendous. 70 million Americans have some sort of criminal record, right? So the discrimination for a huge proportion of the population is sort of untenable if we really care about income inequality and closing those gaps. So I just wanted to encourage attendees, if you have questions, I've got a few more questions I'd love to ask Adam, but if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A. Adam, you've given us a really terrific sort of snapshot of all the terrific work that's gotten you to 3 million users, which is, a terrific start. Where are you heading? What are some of the strategic priorities that you could share with us as to what you're hoping to focus on?
Yeah, so I think continuing to progress our income intelligence, right? So all of the relevant data sets that we can add to the mix, and perfecting and enlarging our existing data sets to do a better and better job of lifting our North Star metric, right? Which is that $5,500 per year income lift metric that we measure consistently. I think with that, we have some near-term initiatives that sort of coincide with that, in that, unfortunately, and this is a whole nother topic, but my belief is that, post-pandemic now, we're living in a very different world where we have exasperated underemployment, but we also have substantial unemployment that's not coming back anytime soon, with, I think, still, unfortunately, a lot of job loss to come once we eventually, run through stimulus dollars. And we, as a result of that, we think there's going to have to be a partial public sector solution to this, right? So things like universal basic income, right? And things like long-term unemployment. And so for us right now, twofold. One is we've already run 5 universal basic income pilots, many of them in partnership with Andrew Yang and Humanity Forward, utilizing our same income intelligence to identify income loss, to deploy funds, and then measure the income lift or impact that those funds generate for individuals from a self-empowerment perspective going forward. So we're going to be announcing a very, very large project on that front. In fact, in collaboration with the largest universal basic income endeavor ever. And then in addition to that, on the unemployment insurance front, right, you have now, roughly 15 to 20 million continuing recipients or applicants of 1099 unemployment insurance called PUA, right, and MEUC, mid-earner unemployment compensation, is part of the CARES Act, and now part of the latest bill that just passed that will continue at least through September. And the discussion in Congress, right, which we're very active in, is that there will be a perpetual form of a 1099 safety net put in place. The issue now is just how to fund it. But the problem is they have no data, right? And so for us, deploying our tech, right, at multiple state levels, hopefully also at the DLL at some point, to obtain this data, right, through obviously member consent or user consent. But in order for them to be able to accelerate benefits payments, we ran an analysis across our member base, our 3 million members, for those that have been receiving unemployment insurance during the pandemic. About 29% of those had to wait over 4 months between their last check and their first payment. And we saw a direct correlation between smaller level of earned income pre-pandemic and the longer time it takes them to receive their benefits because of that lack of connectivity from a data perspective to be able to validate those past earnings, right, through 1099 wages. So for us right now, we think those are areas where we can play a very helpful role in filling that gap that individuals are going to have, just in the fact that they're not going to be able to earn enough just through earned income in order to pay the bills at scale. Yeah,
terrific. And I'm assuming you have preferred tax partners as well, right, through your API relationships?
Well, I mean, through our marketplace, I mean, we work very closely with Intuit, so they're a close partner of ours. So we worked with them. There's also some expense tracking tools that can help people that are 1099 workers identify and mitigate their tax burden. But tax is not an area where we are heavily focused.
Oh, interesting. Do you have perspectives on the recent $1.9 trillion package? Like what, the way in which those funds were deployed?
So, I mean, I think where my perspective is, and I'm going to keep it refined to where I view that I actually have something to add, as opposed to just the uneducated opinion. But I think from my perspective on the unemployment insurance front, right, I think it's largely spot on. I think and that's just relative to the unemployment insurance, right? So there had to be an extension of state unemployment insurance levels, what was called PEUC last year, that has now been extended further up through it's September 6th right now, I believe, under the new bill. And the additional supplemental unemployment insurance that they've, the $400 or $300 that people are receiving in excess funds weekly on top of what would have been their qualified unemployment insurance amounts at the state level, with that supplement being federally funded in the interim. The University of Chicago put out a report that just made me sick to my stomach shortly after the first supplemental unemployment insurance came out, that stated that this would disincentivize workers from going back to work, right? And what we found through our member base is that was the furthest thing from the truth, right, that it empowered folks. And and we wrote a piece on that, Newsweek. Fortunately, they retracted that recently, but that certainly doesn't help in terms of creating fodder for those that that would prefer to not see that in place. And then the extension of benefits for 1099 workers, right, which is PUA and MEUC for those that are mixed earners to be able to qualify for benefits. But the issue is that traditional unemployment insurance UI has been funded through state reserves, right? Employers contribute at the state level and they build up a reserve to fund that, absent the supplemental level that the federal government's now providing. But at the for 1099 earners, there was no funding mechanism, right? And contracting entities don't pay into a pool. And this is a big reason why, Uber and the other gig economy companies push for Prop 22 in California and now are doing the same elsewhere, is to try to avoid that contribution, right? And so, we need to figure out how do we solve for that and create a funding mechanism. I think that's going to be the big issue to solve this year.
Right, that's terrific. Turning to some Q&A from the audience, Betty asks, are there thoughts to help middle-class people who become unemployed or older workers who are laid off after COVID?
Yeah, I mean, this is a little bit of a, it's a very relevant topic, one that's a little bit depressing in that, to the extent that you look at those individuals that have joined Steady since the onset of the pandemic, a large portion of those we would have never expected to see on our platform before, right? These are middle-class earners that have lost their jobs, white-collar jobs in many instances, that have fallen out of the middle class, right? And they've fallen out of the middle class hard, and now are having to take jobs that are at a much lower pay scale than what they earned previously in order to make ends meet, and to, quite frankly, don't have a clear path back to where they were, right? And so, from our perspective, the intelligence that we build is the same, irrespective of worker. We're going to guide them on whatever jobs are available that are going to produce the highest income potential for them. But let me caveat that with jobs that are available, right? And so for many of those individuals, those jobs that are available are not going to be consistent with those jobs that would have been available 18 months ago, right? With that similar skill set, which would put them into a lower earnings bracket. As the world hopefully gets a little bit better, right? Our tech is built to incorporate that, so we will surface those new opportunities, but it's a challenge. On the older worker front, absolutely, given that this was the use case with my father, we work closely with AARP, and they've been a great partner to us on the data side and also on the marketing and promotion side, in that they were very clear when we first started that they used to have a traditional W-2 jobs board, but now they found there were so many of their members that were retiring with just with some retirement savings but inadequate savings, that were having to pick up part-time work, right, well into their retirement years. So that's a continuously evolving relationship. But we actually see our older workers, those that are 40 and above, much more sticky on our platform than perhaps some of the younger millennial workers.
Interesting. A related question is from Supriya, who asks, have you considered partnering with organizations looking to promote skill versus credential-based hiring?
Yeah, so there's a couple of entities, Opportunity at Work, run by Byron August, which is a wonderful program in DC that's created this sort of STARS framing for individuals that have potential for higher earnings than what they're earning today. So we have ongoing collaboration with them. Another entity called Skill Up that has a relationship with Opportunity at Work, and I think those are Skill Up is new, that emerged during the pandemic. And both run by outstanding individuals that are largely policy driven, right? They're focused on trying to stimulate policy through data that's going to support individuals in terms of upskilling or reaching their income potential. So I think there's a lot that we can do with them over time, and that's currently being explored. But that's an area we're not going to fill on our own, but clearly is equally, if not more important.
A little bit of a left field question from Mandy, who asks, how do you see the emergence of the legal cannabis market affecting income inequality going forward?
Well, Snoop Dogg is happy with his investment portfolio. I can tell you that much. But aside from that, I think what we've seen in certain markets, right, is that pre-pandemic, a lot of the cannabis related businesses in states like Colorado, California, were actually creating worker shortages in other areas, right? This was pre-pandemic, because they were able to pay people higher amounts for things like delivery services and so on and so forth. So we don't play a super active role in this regard. We don't preclude those jobs from being listed on our platform so long as they're in states where legalization has taken place. But I don't see any broad-based impact on us today.
Okay. A quick question from an anonymous attendee: what can policymakers or regulators do to support your users?
A lot more than they're doing right now, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think obviously the stimulus bill is important, but as I like to say, I think all of us have been, or at least most of us have been living in what I like to refer to as a quarantine bubble, right, since March of 2020. And we used to have more exposure to the service industry than we do today, right? We're not going in restaurants, we're not going to stores as often, we're not interacting with those that are really providing the fundamental infrastructure that we all live on day in and day out, the same level that we used to. And as a result of that, I think too many of us, including specifically policymakers, are completely disconnected from the realities of those individuals, right? And there's been such a false narrative around, look at the equity markets, right? Look at the wealth gains amongst the population. Well, those wealth gains are continuing to dramatically widen the wealth gap, and those that were hurting before are hurting much, much more today. So I think it comes down to really understanding their constituent base first, especially elected officials, focusing on data, trying to gain access to that data, as opposed to entities like us and many of others trying to force feed it to them, right? They should be proactively seeking it out to make better decisions, because it's just amazing to me how uninformed Congress is about the 1099 worker population, the fact that it's nearly half of the US workforce in some fashion. So a lot more can get done. You don't want me going on for 3 hours, which I could. So I'll just keep it at that.
There's another anonymous question which references our earlier conversation about your venture filling in gaps that government and public agencies aren't collecting. That you've been working with some of them to provide more supplemental real data information. And the question is, over time, is your hope that you will obsolete yourself and that your target audience will get more attention and be tracked by the BLS, et cetera, and other government agencies?
Yeah, I think to some extent, right? And I think there's a way for us to be able to monetize that infrastructure in the meantime, but then build a foundation that's going to support our workers and enable us to adjust with that, right? And be at the center of that adjustment so that we can better serve those workers, because they're always going to need to find ways to earn more, earn better, be more efficient, have someone that's going to be on their side, right? Aside from just the public sector, and that's the role that we hope to fill. But absolutely. I mean, I think unfortunately, if I would say if this was a 6-month target, right, I think us and our investor base would be less committed to deploying the type of resources that we're deploying on this right now. But I think this is a decade-long project, right? Just the discussions around federalizing unemployment insurance, right? So that endeavor, took Deloitte 10 years and $100 million to build a single state UI system in Colorado that's still not working perfect. So trying to deploy that at the federal level and create interconnectivity with 53 different jurisdictions that have unemployment insurance, right? All 50 states plus 3 non-state jurisdictions is going to be a long endeavor.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear you're in it for the long haul, because these problems are so complicated. It is a decade mindset. And someone asks in the Q&A, in your wildest dreams, where is Steady in 20 years?
Well, I'm not a young entrepreneur anymore. I just turned 43. I hate to say I was always a young guy. Now I'm the old guy. So 20 years, I'm going to be pretty old, I think, is a starting point. But
you may not feel that way in 20 years.
Maybe. But I think being an entrepreneur, it certainly ages you too, right? So 43 physical years, but a lot of bumps and bruises. So I think the answer is, I want Steady to generate impact, right? And where I want Steady to be in 20 years is that, the largest portion of those that have the greatest need for support and assistance in this country and potentially beyond have been, the largest portion of those have been bettered by our system that can be bettered, right? So from the standpoint of lifting their financial health through generating a higher level of earnings than they would have been without us. So I can't tell you what that looks like today, but the more people we're able to help through that outcome, the happier and happier I'm going to be.
Yeah, having a measurable impact on closing the income and wealth gap in this country would be a tremendous accomplishment. So I just, in terms of wrap up, I mean, I'm looking at the audience attendees, and we have a mix of a lot of students, but also budding entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs, people working in the fintech space. So awesome. I'm going to ask you a series of advice related questions, but for those different target groups. So advice for other entrepreneurs who are interested maybe in fintech, fin inclusion, and what you wish you had known when you had started on this steady journey.
Well, I mean, I'm a third-time entrepreneur, as you mentioned. So I think just depending on where you're at in your entrepreneurial journey, if this is the first time, I think the thing that I impart on every entrepreneur that I meet is that it's a roller coaster, right? And so I think you have to tune yourself emotionally to ride the ups and the downs the same way, because they change by day, by hour, by week, and the ups don't last long, the downs don't last long, right? And you've got to I think emotionally prepare yourself for treating both in the same, right? Celebrate the successes, but not too much. Celebrate them a little bit, and learn from the challenges, but don't dwell on them, right? Focus on what you have to do tomorrow to improve that. I think from a financial inclusion perspective, right? I think you hit the nail on the head earlier, right? The focus is specifically, if you're a for-profit business, is how do you balance monetization and unit economics versus impact, and how do you create a sustainable revenue model that's going to align your incentives with the constituent base that you're trying to serve, right? I mean, Uber started as a quote unquote impact-oriented business, but the problem is, who do they make their money from? They make their money from the people who are hiring the car. They don't make their money from the worker. So who's their platform over time going to be tuned to? It's going to be that individual who's hiring the car, not the worker. And that's what's happened at scale. And you see that time and time again. That's why I'm not a believer in two-sided marketplaces' ability to really truly help and support both sides of that marketplace. I think it's very, very challenging. And so I think you've got to pick your audience, who you're serving, and ensure that you're aligning your revenue model with who you're serving and who you're intending to serve, and ensuring that your incentives are aligned with who you're intending to serve, so that those incentives never get mixed up.
For those people interested in fin inclusion and fintech, what are your top 3 things that you read on a regular basis to keep up with what's going on in the field?
God, I ingest so much. So I'd say,
yeah.
It's hard to pinpoint them. I mean, I think Lendit's daily newsletter. I get so many I can't even remember the name.
It's a deluge. Yeah.
I literally can't remember. Payments is a good one. PYMENTS, especially anything involving movement of money. And then there's just a million others. So I can't remember the names. I'm picturing a few, but I can't remember.
For the audience, I would suggest Google Adam's name. I think you've been featured in most of those platforms. And so that's sort of a nice shortcut as you're trying to network and get a sense of the landscape. Can I ask you about career advice for people with a data analytics mindset? It's a burgeoning area of opportunity, especially in the finance and financial and product space. But do you have career advice for people who are interested in data analytics? I think you're hiring as well.
Yeah, and I think we have 6 or 7 data analysts right now, and then we've got our data engineering and data science teams. But I think on the data analytics front, I think a couple of things. One is, find your passion, right? Because I've worked with a lot of data analysts, and those that aren't passionate about the problem set they're looking to solve through their analysis don't tend to last long in that position, right? So find something that you're passionate about, not just the data set, but the outcome, right? That you're trying to drive on, to really understand that outcome and the outcome of the organization, and make sure that you're aligned with that. I think secondarily, make sure you have a really strong data engineer supporting your data engineering team. And that if you're a data analyst in particular, right, you're only going to be as effective as the cleanliness of that data and the ability to use that data. So we've gone through, twists and turns in terms of having great data analyst teams, but not having strong enough engineers. So our analysts end up having to, write code, and that took them away from their core focus. And that's not what they were trained in, and they were far less effective and far less happy. We've certainly fixed that over time, but you really got to make sure you have that strong engineering team and foundation if you're an analyst and not an engineer, to be able to work from.
Have you thought internally about the diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives that might help your engineering and data analytics and that type of talent in some ways reflect the customers that you serve?
Yeah, so we've been fortunate to have pretty good success with diversity-based hiring on our data team. We have today 3 African-American members of our data team out of about 14, so over 20%. We're close to half female, and I think 5 out of 14 are female. And yeah, I mean, we've focused very heavily on that. I think it's critical for our team to represent our member base. I think where we certainly are not good enough today is at our executive team level in the organization. Our management team, senior management team, very diverse. Our top 6 executive team, not diverse. And the problem is when you're a startup, you have to hire people that you know early on, and you don't just add to your executive team day in and day out. So it's really an issue of, do we fire someone and replace them, or do we have to sort of hold until we can hire for a new position. Our board is increasing in diversity, but in the rest of the organization, but our executive team is where we still have work to do.
Have you thought about building internal apprenticeship programs?
We are working on that, and the business is based in Atlanta, and fortunately proximity to a number of the HBCUs, and so there is an ongoing dialogue. As you may imagine, and I think it's a wonderful thing, they're overwhelmed with interest right now, right? Which is just amazing to see. And so actually getting in their priority list is a difficult thing, even being in Atlanta, and that's a wonderful thing to see, right? So hopefully that will continue, and it's not just a moment in time. But yeah, we absolutely are doing what we can to both mentor externally, but also mentor internally in terms of our diverse employee base today.
Terrific. Adam, I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been terrific to, you've been very patient and me peppering you with all sorts of questions. But it's such a fascinating model, and, the work that Steady does is something that's so aligned with what we're interested in working on and care about under the Tamer Center for Social Enterprise at Columbia Business School. So just an open call. If there are people on this call that wanted to connect with you afterwards, or if we can be helpful, we would love to help connect people in our network to your team and to you. So Adam, thank you again. Please come back when you're at 10 million users and share us some insights as to your growth trajectory, and wish you and the audience all the best. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Dawn, again.
Thank you, Adam. It's good to see you.